Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulillah. So we continue in our program on healthy relationships. So we still have to cover barriers to communication. And there are some things that we had talked about in the last session, and we left off on the section which is entitled Signs Your Communication is Good or Bad. Hopefully, we see the value in the concept of active listening, and we mentioned this before, that there's no communication if there's no active listening, and that's the basis of the book. In the active listening, what it means basically is that we are giving our full attention to the other person without thinking about what is it that we're going to say or how is it we're going to refute what the other person is talking about, but we're focused on understanding the other person. That's extremely important. Now, one of the things that we have to realize is something which a lot of times is not spoken about, especially in the Muslim community. But in general, in the whole of the society, is a problem, and that's the issue of loneliness. The medical doctor who is now a specialist in addiction, Gabor Mate, who is from Canada, he wrote a book on addiction in which he talks about loneliness as one of the key issues or one of the key problems as to why people have addictions. And he talks about different types of addictions. It's not just the issue of a drug addiction, but there could be a number of different issues. And that problem, he brings it up. He says that loneliness is the underlying cause or reason why a lot of people, they find themselves in addiction, and that loneliness comes from some sort of trauma that happened in their lives in which they were rejected or they felt abandoned or they were abused or a number of different things. But in this society now, the way that we live, a lot of people are lonely even in relationships. So in that example that I gave, we see that loneliness opens up the door to what? It opens up the door to self-destructive behaviors. In the marriage, when loneliness exists, it can open up to people no longer wanting to stay in that relationship, so they begin to go out of the relationship, meaning they begin to look for other partners, or they begin to talk to other people like friends, or they begin to do other things that take away from them fully being in the relationship. That's extremely important to understand. And so loneliness, part of addressing that issue is when we're fully listening to each other and we feel that a person has understood us. We feel connected to that person. There's not going to be any connection, and we mentioned this over and over again. Yani fi al-ilm fi haya, as they say, of course, to a certain degree, that the whole issue of being ashamed to talk about certain things in Islam is not something that we as Muslims should practice, because in knowledge we shouldn't be shameful. And we know that a relationship without physical intimacy, we mentioned that, is a relationship which is going to be problematic. The connection between the husband and the wife is going to be extremely weakened, and there's always going to be issues. But a relationship in which there's no solid communication, that's worse, because at least with communication, you are connected to your spouse. You see what I'm saying? And you're able to have an understanding between you two, but never physical intimacy by itself is not going to overcome the sense of loneliness. The other person they have to feel like they're understood in the relationship. They have to feel that they're respected in the relationship. They have to feel that their word has meaning, right? That when they say something, that it has meaning. And that can't take place if communication is off. So she talked about before some of the barriers to communication. She said being too judgmental, being too critical, or too negative, interrupting the other person when they're speaking, not letting them communicate themselves, right? They can't even get a word out before you immediately have a response. That's a sign when the relationship is in a bad place. That's a sign when the relationship is in a bad place. And of course, this is not just between husband and wife. We see this Unfortunately, between parents and their children, we see this between friends. This is an issue of how this society works in today's time and how the world is. So that's an important point, to think about, that those are things that stop the communication. Also, when you're blaming the other person and you're not taking responsibility for yourself, and that really makes the other person feel that you're not even acknowledging or recognizing them, because the only thing that you're doing is blaming the other person. And then if you bring up things that happened in the past, you can never connect with the person. Why? Because you yourself are only talking about things in the past. You're not giving the person the opportunity to do anything new. You're just bringing up the past mistakes, and then you're blaming them. So that person, and like we say, they feel mutaharrij. They feel that they're so overwhelmed, and they're so powerless, and they feel burdened to the point where they can't do anything. They can't say anything. They can't do anything to please the other person. So that's why she points that out, that these are the things that stop communication. So now we come into the point of what is a series of signs that you have good communication, that the conversation between you and the other person, it has meaning, that you connect with the other person and it flows. You know what I'm saying? The danger here too is that some people are not talkative. So when we say there has to be a good conversation, this is an important point to understand. Why? Because there's cultural differences. Younger people, they like to talk more. They like to talk more. Older people, the older generation, especially if they don't come from this culture, everything is not always a conversation. They have a way to deal with it. And so for us to say, well, no, that's wrong, and you have to be like, that's a problem. And that's what we're beginning to see, that in the Muslim community, the division between the older generation and the younger generation. Sure, the older generation, some things that they should communicate, but they have their way. They have to discover how it is that they're going to deal with that situation. We can't impose upon them what we think. Now, the younger generation, there's a lot more emotion, a lot more emotions. Why? Because the younger generation is more individualistic. It's more about how I feel than how I think. And the older generation is more about what's my responsibility. Two different cultures. So this society and this part is good for the older generations to express themselves, and it will be beautiful because they have commitment to the relationship. No matter what, they try to stay in it. The younger people is about feeling, and there's a lack of commitment. So for instance, if I'm not feeling heard, if I'm not feeling understood, that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to stay in the relationship. That's why immediately, what's the go-to for people to resolve the issues? Talaq. They start talking about talaq, start talking about divorce. Most of the times because of the way that they feel, not because it's a real issue that demands the divorce. So talking all the time is important, for some people, not for others. Everything for some people, that's not their personality, right? And so we have to be careful with that. So she says, whenever you sit down, you talk, and there's good feelings that come out of the conversation. Things are discussed, regardless of what it is, and you're not afraid to work on whatever it is that is discussed. That's healthy communication. But we have to realize that not everybody is going to talk about everything, right? We don't want to leave this session that we heard all good communication is that you talk about everything. No, some people, that's just their personality. But they do have to learn, if you're in a relationship with someone that's talking, and that's important to them for you to communicate, it's important maybe that they have to learn how to communicate and how to talk. But the other person has to accept that person may not talk about everything. You see what I'm saying? Some people are doers. They show that they love you and that they're committed in their actions. And some people, they show that they love you by the way that they talk, and they communicate ideas, and that's important to them, feelings. Here, she's saying she wants us to have an understanding that our communication should have meaning if we're going to talk about the art of communication. So, of course, let's take it this way. Just imagine that we're learning how to communicate. Forget about our personalities, forget about the culture. So what she wants The author of the book, what she wants is us to learn how to have meaningful conversations with each other. We may not do that. That's important. I know a family in which the father wouldn't talk to the mother, and that would drive her crazy. And eventually, it didn't go anywhere. Now, the problem is what? That led to divorce. The problem is that I began to realize in that family something deeper. Why? Because the son was mentioning, my father doesn't talk to me. I try to talk no matter what. I try to talk to my father, but he doesn't talk to me. So that's bad. You see what I'm saying? That's a bad situation. So that's an example where everyone has to learn how to communicate. That's an example where now you see the negative results, the negative effects of not communicating. Because the father has to educate his child, his son, his daughter. The father has to, it's not just the issue of paying bills, but the father has to give them guidance on how to live life. Or just listen and clarify and share ideas. The same thing between husband and wife. But so if we're going to learn communication, we have to realize some people are quiet by nature, and we have to respect them. But also they have to learn how to communicate. Some people are over talkative, and it doesn't mean that because the other person is not talking at the same amount or at the same level, that they're not listening, or they're not connected, or they're not interested. But when we start learning communication, like from, say, for instance, if we were to learn it from scratch, what she wants us to do is to learn how to have meaningful conversations. Learn how to, we can talk about our feelings. We could talk about our thoughts. We could talk about our experiences. We could talk about, what it is that we shared in life together, what it is that we want out of life, where it is that we're going to go. That's important, and we talked about that in the other chapters. From the angle of الشورى في البيت, consultation or shura in the household. الشورى مبنية على الحوار أصلا. There's no ability for us to have shura if there's no consultation, if there's no conversation or communication. So then she says bad communication is that when there's not much conversation at all, or when we talk, we're not talking about things that are necessarily very important. That's an issue. You don't care about how, you don't even ask the other person how their day was. You don't ask them about anything. And this happens, especially, let's take this from the issue of the parent and the child. A lot of times the parents don't even know what's going on, right? They don't know what's going on with the youth in school. They don't know what's going on with the youth throughout their days. They don't know what the youth are suffering. Like now, in today's time, with the issue of the pandemic, many youth have mental health issues. They have depression. They have all kind of stuff that's going on, suicidal thoughts. But guess what? None of that stuff is talked about. Why? Because we're not even asking, how do you feel? Are you okay? You see what I'm saying? So the same thing in the marriage, that we should ask, how are you doing? How was your day? Sometimes the person may not want to share it with you because they don't want to bring the problems home. It's not necessarily because they don't want to communicate. It's because they respect the house. They don't want to bring the problems from out there to the house, right? But sometimes the person needs someone to listen. They're carrying their weight. So there, when that conversation begins to take place, that's what we have to have respect and trust. Because if somebody is sharing something with you and then you throw it in their face later on, or you insult them in the process, you're breaking the trust, right? So, but a sign of bad communication is that there's not much conversation. There's not much interest in the other person. It could be because something's wrong with the person. Something's going on, so they're just shutting down. But what's worse is when that type of communication exists between husband and wife, and then the husband or the wife, they see the other spouse speaking to friends, and they're laughing and they're communicating, or speaking to family members, they're laughing, they're communicating, and then they start to wonder, why don't we have that type of communication? So a sign of bad communication is that it's almost non-existent. There's not nothing is being really shared, or even there's no interest shown. She says a sign of good communication is that both of you know how to listen to each other. That both of you give each other the time with the attentive listening full time. I mean, that means that I'm not on my phone, or I'm not in a book, or I'm doing something else, but I'm focused completely on what the other person is saying. A sign of bad communication is talking more than listening. And for some people, I see this with students. They need time. Sometimes you need to give them the opportunity, and you need to show them that it's okay for them to share their ideas. So it's the same thing in a relationship. But so here she's bringing up the point that a sign of bad communication is that you talk more than you listen. Also, a sign of good communication is that you talk rather than show emotion. And that's something that's a big one. That's a big one, because when there's problems in the relationship overall, and there's a lot of emotion, when it comes time to express, what do you think is going to come out? Ideas are not going to come out. What's going to come out is how you feel, either anger or frustration or any of those realities. But she said that that's a sign of good communication, that when you're talking, more than emotion is coming out. You both listen to each other's ideas and opinions in a calm and relaxed manner without getting triggered. Without getting triggered means that you're not letting what is being said stir your emotions up, so that your emotions become so dominant in the conversation that you lose the focus of what you were even talking about. Again, the key here is learning how to listen to each other. So let's move to the chapter on building a deeper connection. On building a deeper connection. First thing is that she uses the concept, I can't read your mind, so what should I do? So what should I do? A lot of people, she says, they love their spouses, but what they keep finding themselves is fighting with their spouses, and they don't know how to deal with that issue. So to avoid the conflict of constantly fighting, they just shut down. They love the spouse, but they don't know how to communicate. So part of the sign, of building a deeper connection, right, is that we know how to listen to the other person, and we know how to give them their space. We learned about the other person. So this person, if I know that they get upset, but then they calm down, then I give them that space to do that, right? Versus when they're getting upset, then I'm interfering in that process. Versus when they get upset, then I want to correct them and change their behavior at the moment. No, give them a little bit of a chance to express themselves and their emotion, and let them know that you're there for them, right? But it may not be a good time to communicate, because it can lead to more argumentation. But that doesn't mean that because you don't want to communicate at the moment, that you're not there for the person. You get what I'm saying? You give them that space. I know that you're angry right now. Okay, fine. I respect that. Or you're frustrated. I respect that. When you calm down, sometimes you may not say it, because sometimes even saying when you calm down provokes the other person, but you know that when the other person calms down, then you come back. You give them that space. So building the deeper connection. So I can't read your mind, so what should I do? That's a difficult one. That's what the question she's saying. So how, if you don't communicate with me, how is it that I'm going to know? How is it that you think? How is it that you feel? That's the most difficult part. When the connection between husband and wife breaks, that's usually what happens. You don't even know the other person sometimes anymore, especially when it gets really bad. You feel like, who is this person that I'm living with? So both people have to realize, husband and wife, that the other person can't just read their mind. So to build a deeper connection is not only to get to know how it is that the husband and the wife, how it is that they act in certain situations, or how you have to get to know them, how it is that they express their emotions, what happens when they get angry, what happens when they get sad, how do they act. Not only do we have to know the spouse, and that's something that we have to constantly, learn from. How is it that the other person is acting? Because every stage of life is not the same, especially when we start to get older, we start to change. But we have to have that mindset of understanding, I can't read the other person's mind, so that it can't read my mind. So I should communicate. That's part of building the deeper relationship. I should communicate with them in such a way that when I speak, I'm not offending them. When I speak, I'm not insulting them. When I speak, I'm not belittling them. When I speak, they understand that I care. When I speak, they understand that I'm trying to share a point. The other point that she says is, show me how to love you. In other words, this is extremely important. We studied this when I was doing a course in special education. And the idea here is that you may have to teach the other person about you, what it is that you need, especially when you get older. You may have to teach the other person that this bothers me. It's not you, it's just that these things bother me. Or for instance, you may have to teach the other person that I like it when you give me the opportunity, you ask me how I'm doing, and then you ask me, what do you think? I like that. So you're teaching the other person about you. You teach the other person, I feel loved, for instance, when you ask about me. I feel loved when you invite me to eat with you. I feel loved when you look for me. In other words, whatever it is that it makes you feel that the other person loves you. You have to share with them, because everybody's not the same. For some people, that's not important, but for some people, that's important. For some people, they feel that their spouse loves them. It's not even that they want the spouse to cook. They can cook for themselves, but they feel that if the spouse cooks for them, they feel loved. For some people, they don't care if the spouse cooks or not. Some people, yes, their idea is, you have to serve me. But we're not talking about that mentality. We're talking about a person who, when there's food prepared or when I'm invited to eat, that's a feel that you care about me, which is different than serving me and, like in that regard. It's more that you're showing that you care about me. In other words, we all have to be clear with ourselves. What is it that makes us feel loved? And we have to communicate that with our spouse. We have to communicate that with the person that we love. Now, everything, that person may not be able to do everything. You understand what I'm saying? But at least they understand where you're coming from. At least they understand where you're coming from. That's important. I'll give you an example. My grandparents, when they got older, my grandfather was always working outside of the home. Always outside of the home, working. So when he retired, what he discovered is my grandmother she was always in the house, not outside of the house. So he discovered that my grandmother, she ruled that house the way she wanted to rule. So when he retired, he's now in the situation where he's in the house with her. She's not used to him being around, right? Because for so many years he was out working. And when he would come, he would eat and then go to sleep, that type of thing. Routine that a lot of men have. And it became more and more a problem in my family. Why? Because now sometimes my grandfather, he wanted to eat. So when he wants to eat, he wants to go into the kitchen. When he goes into the kitchen, he wants to take this and that. So my grandmother has the system of how it is that she handles that kitchen. And if somebody takes the kitchen out of its order, it's war. Because this is my kitchen, this is how I do it. You see what I'm saying? So she had a routine. At this time in the morning, we make coffee. At this time in the morning, start to prepare the food for the, after breakfast, start to prepare food for, the afternoon for the evening meal. At this time, I start mopping. At this time, I start watching my TV programs. So my grandfather didn't find what was his space. So then he began to stay in his room, and then when he would come, it would be that issue. Like, I want to eat something, So then it became a whole different change around. What was the change around? So he would stay up at night and he would cook at night and do whatever he wanted like that. And then it became an issue where they both were not communicating. Of course, they were older. You know what I'm saying? They were older. So then health issues came. My grandmother has thyroid, or she had thyroid because she's not alive anymore. And my grandfather had high blood pressure and diabetes. That doesn't mix. Why? Because the thyroid thing makes you snappy, and so does the high blood pressure. So when something goes, and the diabetes also can do that. So when there's an exchange of ideas, it becomes a clash, and we saw that we had to separate them. We had to separate them, and then at the end, before they passed away, they came back together. But as a family, we had to separate them in order to function. And I always look back at that. If there was only one thing, if they only can communicate properly, this is what I experienced during this time. And can you not do this because it doesn't, it doesn't help me or it bothers me. But because they're older, that type of communication is not something that they really learned. You see what I'm saying? The lifestyle that they got used to is you play your role, I play my role, and that's it. We don't talk a lot about these types of issues, about how we feel, how we should function with each other. And so that was something that I always learned, that was always an issue, that if you don't express what it is that you need, I need my space, or this is how I like this. I like it to be clean. I like it to be organized. Because some people, they're like very controlling with that issue. You know what I'm saying? And if it's not that way, it bothers them. When you're married, if you had to know that about the person before, that they're like that. You see what I'm saying? And if they're like that as you're getting married, that's part of being married. It's not everything that, that the other person does, we're not going to like, and so we're going to end the relationship. That's a mentality that's not healthy. We're married to another human being, so they have their own idea of doing things. So that's kind of the concept of show me how to love you. Show me what it is that you need, what's important to you, right? That's another way to build a deeper communication. And this some people may feel a little uncomfortable with this, but it's also the issue of intimacy. Like, show me how to touch you. And that's important. Some people they want to hold hands. Some people, they want to hug. Like that. Yeah, that's it. That's important. And there's other stuff in the relationship. Husband and wife have to talk about these things. In Islam, there's no shame in that. That builds a deeper communication. That's one of the number one issues that we have in the whole of the Muslim world. Husband and wife don't talk about intimacy. And it leads to big issues. But here, that is what she's saying is important for building a deeper connection. In the time period when a person is having a hard time in life, here she says, I want you to tell me how to make you feel better. For some people, for instance, if they're depressed or they're going through a hard time, they just, I need space. For other people, it's like, I need that. For other people, it's like they may need something else. They may say, can you please make sure that the kids are okay? Can you please make sure that my parents are okay or whatever? But the idea here is, tell me how to help you feel better. What is it that I can do to help you feel better? It's not only in those types of situations, maybe in the relationship, maybe in life, maybe a person is going through a bad time, bad mood, whatever it is. Don't just assume that what you know how to make the other person feel better, because what you did before to make them feel better may not work now. You see what I'm saying? So when you're asking them, tell me, what it is that you need to feel better. You're letting them know that you're respecting what it is that they need, what it is that they want. And if you can do it, then you try to do it. That's a way of building, a deeper sense of intimacy. So with that, inshallah, we end, and until next time, wa nastaghfirullah wa natubu ilayh. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Fi amanillah. Yeah.
I don't know you do this every Thursday night.
Yeah, I was doing it every Thursday night at 7:30. Yeah. Yeah. But because of the salat change.
I wish take my pastor.